Good evening. Hello. I'm back to read more Lovecraft short stories. We're in the middle of Shadow Out of Innsmouth. Starting early tonight because I only got like a third of the way through the story last night, so I wanted more time tonight. I guess we could get to it while some people come in. So in the story last night, the main character took this like rickety trolley into town and he was discussing like how dingy and in disrepair the whole town is. It's very creepy. All the fish people have fish skin. It's very mysterious how like the fish there are very abundant. Um yeah, so I guess I'll continue. And at this point in the story, the main character is talking to like a guy who works at the grocery store who's not from Innsmouth, and he's kind of just talking crap about all the denizens of Innsmouth, like all the creepy stuff that goes on. So that's where we are in the story. I'll continue. The store clerk says, everybody was in a bad way them days. Trade falling off, mills losing business, even the new ones. And the best of our menfolk killed a privateerin in the War of 1812, or lost with the Elegy brig and the Ranger Snow, both on 'em Gilman venters. Obed Marsh, he had 3 ships afloat, brigantine Columby, brig Hetty, and bark Sumatra Queen. He was the only one as kept on with the East Indian Pacific trade, though Esdras Martin's barkentine Malay Pride made a venter as late as 28. Never was nobody like Cap'n Obed, old Limbo Satan, ha ha. I can mind him a-tellin' about furrin parts, and callin' all the folks stupid for goin' to Christian meetin' and bearin' their burdens meek and lowly. Says they oughter get better gods like some of the folks in the Injies. Gods as 'ud bring 'em good fishin' in return for their sacrifices, and 'ud really answer folks' prayers. Man Elliot, his fust mate, talked a lot too, only he was agin' folks doin' any heathen things. Told about an island east of Otaheite, where they was a lot of stone ruins older'n anybody knew anything about. Kinda like 'em on Ponap in the Carolines, but with carvin's of faces that looked like the big statues on Easter Island. They was a little volcanic island near that too, whar they was other ruins with different carvin's. Ruins all wore away like they'd been under the sea on, and with pictures of awful monsters all over 'em. Well, Sir Matt, he says the natives around there had all the fish they could catch, and sported bracelets and armlets and head rigs made out of a queer kind of gold, and covered with pictures of monsters just like the ones carved over the ruins on the little island. Sorter fish-like frogs or frog-like fishes that was drawed in all kinds of positions like they was a human beings. Nobody could get around 'em whar they got all the stuff, and all the other natives wondered how they managed to find fish in plenty, when the very next islands had lean pickin's. Matt he got to wonderin' too, and so did Cap'n Obed. Obed he notices, besides, that lots of the handsome young folks 'ud drop out of sight for good from year to year, and that they want many old folks around. Also, he thinks some of the folks look derned queer, even for Kanakies. It took Obed to get the truth about 'em, about them heathen. I don't know how he done it, but he begun by trading for the gold-like things they wore. Asked 'em what they come from, and if they could get more, and finally wormed the story out of the old chief. Wallachia they called him. Nobody but Obed had ever believed the old yeller devil, but the cap'n could read folks like they were books. Heh. Nobody never believes me now when I tell 'em, and I don't suppose you will. And I don't suppose you will, young feller. They'll come to look at you. You've kinda got 'em of sharp readin' eyes like Obed had. The old man's whisper grew fainter, and I found myself shuddering at the terrible, sincere portentousness of his intonation, even though I knew his tale could be nothing but drunken fantasy. While Sir Obed, he larnt that these things on the earth, as most folks never heerd about, and wouldn't believe if they did hear. It seems these Kanakys was sacrificing heaps of their young men and maidens to some kind of god things that lived under the sea, and getting all kinds of favor in return. They met the things on the little islet with the queer ruins, and it seems them awful pictures of frogfish monsters was supposed to be pictures of these things. Maybe they was kind of critters as got all the mermaid stories and such started. They had all kinds of cities on the sea bottom, and this island was heaved up from thar. Seems they was some of the things alive in stone buildings when the island come up so sudden to the surface. That's how the Kanakys got wind they was down thar. Made sign talk as soon as they got over being skeert, and pierced up a bargain afore long. Okay, he's actually talking to the 90-year-old man. I forget his name. Let me see. Zadok Allen. He's talking to Zadok Allen. He's like 90 something years old, and he's giving him the story of the city. Okay. Them things lacked human sacrifices. Had 'em ages before, but lost track of the upper world after a time. What they done to victims, it ain't for me to say, and I guess Obed wa'n't none too sharp about asking. But it was all right with the heathens, because they'd been having a hard time and was desperate about everything. They give 'em a sartain number of young folks to the sea things twict every year. May Eve and Halloween, regular as could be. Also give some of the carved knickknacks they made. What the things agreed to give in return was plenty of fish. They druv 'em in from all over the sea, and a few gold-like things now and then. Well, as I says, the natives met the things on the little volcanic islet, goin' that in canoes with the sacrifices, etc., and bringing back any of the gold-like jewels as was comin' to 'em. At first, things didn't never go on to the main island, but arter a time, they come to want to. Seems they hankered after mixin' with the folks, and havin' jint ceremonies on the big days, May Eve and Halloween. You see, they was able to live both in and out of water, what they call amphibians. I guess the Kanakys told him as how folks from the other islands might want to wipe 'em out if they got wind of them being like that. But says they don't care much, because they could wipe out the whole brood of humans if they was willin' to bother. That is, as any didn't have sartain signs, such as was used to once by the lost old ones, whatever they was. But not wantin' to bother, they'd lay low when anybody visited the island. When it come to matin' with them toad-looking fishes, the Kanakys kind of balked, but finally they larnt something as put a new face on the matter. Seems the human folks has got a kind of relation to such water beasts, that everything alive come out of the water once and only needs a little change to go back in. Them things told the Kanakys that if they mixed bloods there'd be children as 'ud look human at first, but later turned more and more like the things till finally they take to the water and jine the main lot of things down that. And this is the most important part, young feller. Them as turned into fish things and went into the water wouldn't never die. Them things never died except they was kilt violent. Well, sir, it seems by the time Obed knowed them islanders, they was all full of fish blood from them deep water things. When they got old and begun to show it, they was kip hid until they felt like talking to the water and quitting the place. Some was more tetched than others, and some never did change quite enough to take to the water, but mostly they turned out jest the way them things said. Them as was born more like the things changed hourly, but them as was nearly human sometimes stayed on the island till they was past 70, though they'd usually go down under for trial trips afore that. Folks as had took to the water generally come back a good deal to visit. So's a man 'ud often be a-talking to his own 5 times great-grandfather, who'd left the dry land a couple of 100 years or so afore. Everybody got out of the idea of dying, except in canoe wars with the other islanders, or as sacrifices to the sea gods down below, or from snake bite or plague or sharp galloping ailments or something afore they could take to the water, but simply looked forward to a kind of change that wa'n't a bit horrible after a while. They thought that what they got was well worth all they'd had to give up. And I guess Obed kind of come to think the same hisself when he'd chewed out over Wallacheia's story a bit. Wallachia, though, was one of the few as hadn't got none of the fish blood, being of a royal line that intermarried with royal lines on other islands. Wallachia, she showed Obed a lot of rites and incantations as has to do with the sea things, and let him see some of the folks in the village had changed a lot from regular things from right out of the water. In the end, he'd a given a funny kind of thingamajig made out of lead or something, that said he'd bring up the fish things from any place in the water, what they might be, a nest of 'em. The idea was to drop it down with the right kind of prayers and such, while Achaia allowed as the things was scattered all over the world, so anybody that looked about could find a nest and bring 'em up if they was wanted. Matt, he didn't like this business at all, and wanted Obed should keep away from the island. But the cap'n was a sharp for gain, and found he could get them gold-lack things so cheap it'd pay him to make a specialty of 'em. Things went on that way for years, and Obed got enough of that gold-like stuff to make him start the refinery in Waite's old run-down Fullen mill. He didn't dast sell the pieces like they was, for folks 'ud be all the time asking questions. All the same, his crews 'ud get a piece of 'em and dispose it for now and then, even though they was swore to keep quiet. And he let his women folks wear some of the pieces as was more human-like than most. Well, come about 38, well, I was 7 year old. Obed and he found the island people all wiped out between voyages. Seems the other islanders had got wind of what was going on, and had took matters into their own hands. S'pose they must 'a' had, after all. Them old magic signs, as the sea things says, was the only things they was afeared of. No tellin' what any of 'em Kanakies will chance to get a holt of when the sea bottom throws up some island with ruins older'n the deluge. Pious cusses these was. They didn't leave nothin' standin' on either the main island or the little volcanic islet, except what parts of the ruins was too big to knock down. In some places they was little stones strewed about, like charms, with somethin' on 'em like what you call a swastika nowadays. Probably them was the old ones' signs. Folks all wiped out, no trace of gold-like things, and none of the nearby Kanakies 'd breathe a word about the matter. Wouldn't even admit they'd ever been any people on that island. That naturally hit Obed pretty hard. Seeing as his normal trade was doing very poor. It hit the whole of Innsmouth, too, because in seafaring days what profited the master of a ship generally profited the crew proportionate. Most of the folks around the town took to hard times keep a ship like and resigned, but they was in bad shape because the fishin' was peterin' out and the mills wa'n't doin' none too well. Then's the time Obed he begun a cursin' at the folks for bein' dull sheep and prayin' to the Christian heaven as didn't help 'em none. He told 'em he'd knowed of folks as prayed to gods they give somethin' you really need, and says if a good bunch of men 'ud stand by him, he could maybe get a holt of sartin powers as 'ud bring plenty of fish and quite a bit of gold. Of course, them as sarved on the Sumatry Queen, seed the island, know what he meant, and wa'n't none too anxious to get close to the sea things like they'd heerd tell on. But them 'at didn't know 'twas all about got kind of swayed by what Obed had to say, and begun to ask him what he could do to set him on the way to the faith as 'd bring 'em results. Here the old man faltered, mumbled, and lapsed into a moody and apprehensive silence, glancing nervously over his shoulder, and then turning back to stare fascinatedly at the distant black reef. When I spoke to him, he did not answer, so I knew I would have to let him finish the bottle. The insane yarn I was hearing interested me profoundly, for I fancied there was contained within in a sort of crude allegory based on the strangeness of Innsmouth, and elaborated by an imagination at once creative and full of scraps of exotic legend. Not for a moment did I believe that the tale had any really substantial foundation, but nonetheless the account held a hint of genuine terror, if only because it brought in references to strange jewels, clearly akin to the malign tiara I had seen at the Newburyport. Perhaps the ornaments had, after all, come from some strange island. And possibly the wild stories were lies of the bygone Obed himself rather than of this antique toper. I handed Zadok the bottle, and he drained it to the last drop. It was curious how he could stand so much whiskey, for not even a trace of thickness had come into his high, wheezy voice. He licked the nose of the bottle and slipped it into his pocket, and then beginning to nod and whisper softly to himself. I bent close to catch any articulate words he might utter, and thought I saw a sardonic smile behind the stained, bushy whiskers. Yes, he was really forming words, and I could grasp a fair proportion of them. Poor Matt, he allus was agin it. Tried to line up the folks on his side, and had long talks with the preachers. No use. They run the Congregational parson out of town, and the Methodist feller quit. Never did see Resolved Babcock, the Baptist parson. Again, wrath of Jehovah. I was a mighty little critter, but I heerd what I heerd and seen what I seen. Dagon and Ashtoreth, Belial and Beelzebub, golden calf and the idols of Canaan and the Philistines, Babylonish abominations. Mene, mene, tekel upharsin. It's like his accent gets thicker the more he drinks. It's better. It's great. He stopped again, and from the look in his watery blue eyes, I feared he was close to stupor after all. But when I gently shook his shoulder, he turned on me with astonishing alertness and snapped out of some more obscure phrases. Don't believe me, hey? Huh. Then just tell me, young feller, why Cap'n Obed and 20-odd other folks used to row about in Devil Reef in the dead of night and chant things so loud you could hear 'em all over town when the wind was right. Tell me that, hey? And tell me why Obed was allus dropping heavy things down in the deep water, the other side of the reef, where the bottom shoots down like a cliff lower you can sound. Tell me what he done with that funny-shaped lead thingamajig as Wellicaya gave him. Hey, boy, and what did they tell all Hal on May Eve, and again the next Halloween? And why'd the new church parsons, fellers as used to be sailors, wear them queer robes and cover themselves with the gold-lack things Obed brung? Hey! This is not ASMR, you're right. I'm reading Lovecraft short stories. Join us for Lovecraft short stories. If you want ASMR, there are lots of other videos on this channel. But I'm gonna continue reading Shadow out of Innsmouth. The old man was getting hysterical, and I began to shiver with a nameless alarm. He laid a gnarled claw on my shoulder, and it seemed to me that its shaking was not altogether that of mirth. Suppose one night you seed something heavy heaved off'n Obed's dory beyond the reef, and then larn next day a young feller was missing from home. Hey? Did anybody ever see hide or hair of Hiram Gilman again? Did they? And Nick Pierce? And Lully Waite? And Adoniram Southwick? And Harry Garrison? Hey! Heh. Shapes talkin' sign language with their hands, them as had real hands. Well, sir, that was the time Obed begun to get on his feet again. Folks see his 3 darters a wearing gold-like things as nobody'd never see them on afore, and smoke started comin' out of the refinery chimbly. Other folks were prosperin', too. Fish began to swarm into the harbor fit to kill, and heaven knows what sized cargoes we begun to ship about to Newburyport, Arkham, and Boston. 'Twas then Obed got the Old Branch Railroad put through. Some Kingsport fishermen heerd about the Ketchum, came up in sloops, but they was all lost. Nobody never see 'em again. And just then our folks organized the Esoteric Order of Dagon, and bought Masonic Hall off in Calvary Commandery for it. Matt Elliott was a Mason, and agin the sellin', but he dropped out of sight just then. Remember, I ain't sayin' Obed was set on heavin' things just like there was on that Kankakee Isle. I don't think he aimed at fuss to do no mixin', no raise no young'uns to take to the water, turn into fishes with eternal life. He wanted them gold things, and was willin' to pay heavy, and I guess the others was satisfied for a while. Come in 46, the town done some lookin' and thinkin' for itself. Too many folks missin'. Too much wild preachin' and meetin' of a Sunday. Too much talk about that reef. I guess I'd done a bit by tellin' Selectman Mowry what I see from the cupola. There was a party one night follered by Obed's crowd about to the reef, and I heerd shots betwixt the dories. Next day Obed and 32 others was in jail, with everybody a-wonderin' just what was afoot and just what charge agin 'em could be got to Holt. God, if anybody'd look ahead a couple of weeks later when nothing had been throwed into the sea for that long. Zadok was showing signs of affright and exhaustion, and I let him keep silence for a while, though glancing apprehensively at my watch. The tide had turned and was coming in now, and the sound of the waves seemed to arouse him. I was glad for that tide, for at high water the fishy smell might not be so bad. Again I strained to catch whispers. Oris says the hotel is where it gets really good. Yeah, that is where it gets really good. It's starting to get good. Second favorite is Whisper in the Darkness. Okay, maybe I'm borrowing this book, but maybe I can get a copy and I'll eventually read The Whisper in the Darkness. Okay. That awful night, I seed 'em. I was in the cupola. Hordes of 'em. Swarms of 'em. All over the reef and swimming up in the harbor into Montset. God, what happened in the streets of Innsmouth that night? They rattled our door, but Pa wouldn't open. Then he clum out of the kitchen winder with his musket to find Selectman Maury and see what he could do. Mounds of the dead and dying, shots and screams, shouting at old squire and town squire, and Newchurch Green jail throwed open, proclamation, treason. Called it the plague when folks come in and found half our people missing. Nobody left but them as a jine in with Obed and them things, or else keep quiet. Never hear to my pa no more. The old man was panting and perspiring profusely. His grip on my shoulder tightened. Everything cleaned up in the marnin', but they was traces. Obed, he kinder takes charge and says things is going to be changed. Others'll worship with us at meetin' time, and sartin houses has got to entertain guests. They wanted to mix like they done with the Canakees, and he for one didn't feel bound to stop 'em. Far gone was Obed, just like a crazy man on the subject. He says they brung us fish and treasure, and should have what they hankered after. Nothin' was to be different on the outside. Only we was to keep shy as strangers if we knowed what was good for us. We all had to take the oath of Dagon, and later on they was second and third oaths that some of us took. Them as 'ud help special 'ud get special rewards, gold and such. No use balkin', for they was millions of 'em down thar. They'd rather not start rising and wiping out humankind, but if they was gave away and forced to, they could do a lot toward just that. We didn't have them old charms to cut 'em off like folks in the South Sea did, and them Canakees wouldn't never give away their secrets. Yield up enough sacrifices and savage knickknacks and harborage in the town when they wanted it, and they'd let well enough alone. Wouldn't bother no strangers as might bear tales outside. That is, without they got pryin'. All in the band of the faithful order of Dagon, and the children should never die, but go back to the mother Hydra and father Dagon, what we all come from once. Ya, Cthulhu Fgan. I can't even pronounce it. Funglui Mulanaf, Cthulhu Rulaya Uganagalftan. Old Zadok was fast lapsing into stark raving, and I held my breath. Poor old soul, to what pitiful depths of hallucination had his liquor, plus his hatred of the decay, alienage, and disease around him, brought that fertile, imaginative brain. He began to moan now, and tears were coursing down his channeled cheeks into the depths of his beard. God, what I seen since I was 15 years old. Mene take you farseen. The folks was missin', and them kilt themselves. Them as told things in Arkham or Ipswich or such places was all called crazy, like you are calling me right now. But God, what I seen. They'd a kilt me long ago for what I know, only I'd took the fuss and second oaths of Dagon off an Obed, so was protercted unless'n a jury of 'em proved I told things known and deliberate. But I wouldn't take the third oath. I'd a died ruther'n take that. It got wuss around Civil War time, when children born since 46 begun to grow up. Some of 'em, that is. I was afeard, never did no pryin' after that awful night, and never seen one of them close to in all my life. That is, never no full-blooded one. I went to the war, and if I'd had any guts of sense, I'd a never come back, but settled away from here. But folks wrote me things once so bad. Thus, that, I suppose, was because government draft men was in town arter '63. Arter the war, it was just as bad again. People begun to fall off, mills and shops shet down. Shipping stopped and the harbor choked up, railroad gave up, but they never stopped swimming in and out of the river from that cursed reef. They never stopped swimming. Oh, Satan, and more attic windows got boarded up, and more noises was heerd in houses as once supposed to be have nobody in 'em. Folks outside have the stories about us. S'pose you've heard a plenty on 'em seein' what questions you asked. Stories about things they seed now and then, and about that queer jewelry as still comes in from somewheres ain't quite all melted up. But nothin' never gets definite. Nobody'll never believe nothin'. They call them gold-like things paraloot, and allow the Innsmouth folks has furrin blood or is distempered or somethin'. Besides, them that lives here show off as many strangers as they kin, and encourage the rest not to get very curious, specially around that time. Beasts balk at the critters. Hosses wuss'n mules. But when they got autos, that was all right. In '46, Cap'n Obed took a second wife that nobody in town never see. Some says he didn't want to, but was made to by them as he called in. Had 3 children by her. 2 has disappeared young, but one gal looked like anybody else and was edicated in Europe. Obed finally got her married off by a trick to an Arkham feller as didn't suspect nothin'. But nobody outside'll have nothin' to do with Innsmouth folks now. Barnabas Marsh, that runs the refinery now, is Obed's grandson by his first wife. Son of Onesphorus, his eldest son, but his mother was another of them as one never seed outdoors. Right now, Barnabas is about changed. Can't shut his eyes no more, and is all out of shape. They say he still wears clothes, but he'll take to the water soon. Maybe he's tried it already. They do sometimes go down for little spells afore they go for good. Ain't been seed about in public for nigh on 10 year. Dun know how his poor wife kin feel. She come from Ipswich, and they nigh lynched Barnabas when he courted her 50-odd year ago. Obed, he died in '78. And all the next generation is gone now. The first wife's children dead, and the rest, God knows. The sound of the incoming tide was now very insistent, and little by little it seemed to change the old man's mood from maudlin tearfulness to watchful fear. He would pause now and then to renew those nervous glances over his shoulder or out toward the reef, and despite the wild absurdity of his tale, I could not help beginning to share his vague apprehensiveness. Zadok now grew shriller, and seemed to be trying to whip up his courage with louder speech. "Hey, you, why don't you say something? How'd you like to be living in a town like this, with everything a-rottin' and a-dyin' and a-boardin' up monsters crawlin' and bleatin' and barkin' and hoppin' around black cellars and attics every way you turn? Hey, how'd you like to hear the howlin' night after night from the churches, and order a dagon hall, and know what's doin' part of the howlin'? How'd you like to hear what comes from the awful reef every May Eve and Hallowmas? Hey, they think the old man's crazy, eh? Well, sir, let me tell you, that ain't the wust." Zadok was really screaming now, and the mad frenzy of his voice disturbed me more than I care to own. "Curse ye, don't set there a-starin' at me with them eyes. I tell Obed Marsh he's in hell, and is got to stay there. Huh, huh, in hell, I says. Can't get me, I han't done nothin', nor told nobody nothin'. Oh, you young feller? Well, even if I han't told nobody nothin' yet, I'm a-goin' to now. You just set still and listen to me, boy. That is what I ain't never told nobody. It says I didn't do no pryin' arter that night, but I founded things out just the same. You want to know what the real horror is, hey? Well, it's this. It ain't what them fish devils has done, but what they are a-goin' to do. They're a-bringin' things up out whar they come from into the town. Been doin' it for years, and slackenin' up lately. Them houses north of the river, between Water and Main Street, is full of 'em. Them devils, and what they brung, and what they get ready, I say. When they get ready, ever hear tell of a shoggoth? Hey, d'ye hear me? I tell you, I know what them things be. I seen them one night when Hey, ah, The hideous suddenness and inhuman frightfulness of the old man's shriek almost made me faint. His eyes, looking past me toward the malodorous sea, were positively starting from his head, while his face was a mask of fear worthy of Greek tragedy. His bony claw dug monstrously into my shoulder, and he made no motion as I turned my head to look at whatever he had glimpsed. There was nothing that I could see, only the incoming tide, with perhaps one set of ripples more local than the long-flung line of breakers. But now Zadok was shaking me, and I turned back to watch the melting of that fear-frozen face into a chaos of twitching eyelid and mumbling gums. Presently, his voice came back, albeit as a trembling whisper. "Get out of here. Get out of here. They seen us. Get out for your life. Don't wait for nothing. They know now. Run for it. Quick. Out of this town." Another heavy wave dashed against the loosening masonry of the bygone wharf, and changed the mad ancient's whisper into another inhuman and blood-curdling scream. Yeah! Yeah! Before I could recover my scattered wits, he had relaxed his clutch on my shoulder, and dashed wildly inland toward the street, reeling northward around the ruined warehouse wall. I glanced back at the sea, but there was nothing there, and when I reached Water Street and looked along toward the north, there was no remaining trace of Zadok Allen. Part 4. I can hardly describe the mood in which I was left by this harrowing episode. An episode at once mad and pitiful, grotesque and terrifying. The grocery boy had prepared me for it, yet the reality left me nonetheless bewildered and disturbed. Puerile though the story was, old Zadok's insane earnestness and horror had communicated to me a mounting unrest, which joined with my earlier sense of loathing for the town and its blight of intangible shadow. Later I might sift the tale and extract some nucleus of historic allegory. Just now, I wished to put it out of my head. The hour had grown perilously late. My watch said 7:15, and the Arkham bus left town square at 8. So I tried to give my thoughts as neutral and practically cast as possible. Meanwhile, walking rapidly through the deserted streets of gaping roofs and leaning houses toward the hotel where I had checked my valise and would find my bus. Though the golden light of late afternoon gave the ancient roofs and decrepit chimneys an air of mystic loveliness and peace, I could not help glancing over my shoulder now and then. I would surely be very glad to get out of malodorous and fear-shadowed Innsmouth, and wish there was some other vehicle than the bus driven by that sinister-looking fellow sergeant. Yet I did not hurry too precipitately, for there were architectural details worth viewing at every silent corner, and I could easily, I calculated, cover the necessary distance in a half an hour. Studying the grocery youth's map and seeking a route I had not traversed before, I chose Marsh Street instead of State for my approach to Town Square. Near the corner of Fall Street, I began to see scattered groups of furtive whisperers, and when I finally reached the square, I saw that almost all the loiterers were congregated around the door of the Gilman house. It seemed as if many bulging, watery, and unwinking eyes looked oddly at me as I claimed my valise in the lobby, and I hoped that none of those unpleasant creatures would be my fellow passengers on the coach. The bus, rather early, rattled in with 3 passengers somewhat before 8, and an evil-looking fellow on the sidewalk muttered a few indistinguishable words to the driver. Sargent threw out a mailbag and a roll of newspapers and entered the hotel, while the passengers, the same men whom I had seen arriving in Newburyport that morning, shambled to the sidewalk and exchanged some faint guttural words with a loafer in a language I could have sworn was not English. I boarded the empty coach and took the same seat I had taken before, but was hardly settled before Sargent reappeared and began mumbling in a throaty voice of peculiar repulsiveness. I was, it appeared, in very bad luck. There had been something wrong with the engine, despite the excellent time made from Newburyport, and the bus could not complete the journey to Arkham. No, it could not possibly be repaired that night, nor was there any other way of getting transportation out of Innsmouth, either to Arkham or elsewhere. Sargent was sorry, but I would have to stop over at the Gilman. Probably the clerk would make the price easy for me, but there was nothing else to do. Almost dazed by this sudden obstacle, and violently dreading the fall of night in this decaying and half-unlighted town, I left the bus and re-entered the hotel lobby, where the sullen, queer-looking night clerk told me I could have room 428 on the next top floor. Large, but without running water. for $1. Despite what I had heard of this hotel in Newburyport, I signed the register, paid my dollar, and let the clerk take my valise, and followed that sour, solitary attendant up 3 creaking flights of stairs past dusty corridors, which seemed wholly devoid of life. My room, a dismal rear one with 2 windows and bare cheap furnishings, overlooked a dingy courtyard, otherwise hemmed in by low, deserted brick blocks, and commanded a view of decrepit westward stretching roofs with a marshy countryside beyond. At the end of the corridor was a bathroom, a discouraging relique with ancient marble bowl, tin tub, faint electric light, and musty wooden paneling around all the plumbing fixtures. It being still daylight, I descended to the square and looked around for a dinner of some sort, noticing as I did so the strange glances I received from the unwholesome loafers. Since the grocery was closed, I was forced to patronize the restaurant I had shunned before. A stooped, narrow-headed man with staring, unwinking eyes and flat-nosed wench with unbelievably thick, clumsy hands, being in attendance. The service was all of the counter type, and it relieved me to find that much was evidently served from cans and packages. A bowl of vegetable soup with crackers was enough for me, and I soon headed back for my cheerless room at the Gilman, getting an evening paper and a fly-specked magazine from the evil-visaged clerk at the rickety stand behind the desk. As twilight deepened, I turned on that one feeble electric bulb over the cheap, iron-framed bed, and tried as best I could to continue the reading I had begun. I felt it advisable to keep my mind wholesomely occupied, for it would not do to brood over the abnormalities of this ancient, blight-shadowed town while I was still within its borders. The insane yarn I had heard from the aged drunkard did not promise very pleasant dreams, and I felt I must keep the image of his wild, watery eyes as far as possible from my imagination. Also, I must not dwell on what the factory inspector had told the Newburyport ticket agent about the Gilman house and the voices of its nocturnal tenants. Not on that, nor on the face beneath the tiara in the black church doorway, the face for whose horror my conscious mind could not account. It would perhaps have been easier to keep my thoughts from disturbing topics had the room not been so gruesomely musty. As it was, his lethal mustiness blended hideously with the town's general fishy odor, and persistently focused one's fancy on death and decay. Another thing that disturbed me was the absence of a bolt on the door of my room. One had been there, as marks clearly showed, but there were signs of recent removal. No doubt it had become out of order, like so many other things in this decrepit edifice. In my nervousness, I looked around and discovered a bolt on the clothes press which seemed to be of the same size, judging from the marks, as the one formerly on the door. To gain a partial relief from the general tension, I busied myself by transferring this hardware to the vacant place with the aid of a handy 3-in-1 device, including a screwdriver which I kept on my keyring. The bolt fitted perfectly, and I was somewhat relieved when I knew that I could shoot it firmly upon retiring. Not that I had any real apprehension of this kind. Not that I had any real apprehension of its need, but that any symbol of security was welcome in an environment of this kind. There were adequate bolts on the 2 lateral doors to connecting rooms, and these I proceeded to fasten. I did not undress, but decided to read till I was sleepy, then lie down with only my coat, collar, and shoes off. Taking a pocket flashlight from my valise, I placed it in my trousers so that I could read my watch if I woke up later in the dark. Drowsiness, however, did not come, and when I stopped to analyze my thoughts, I found to my disquiet that I was really unconsciously listening for something which I dreaded but could not name. That inspector's story must have worked on my imagination more deeply than I had suspected. Again, I tried to read, but I found that I made no progress. After a time, I seemed to hear the stairs and corridors creak at intervals as if with footsteps, and wondered if the other rooms were beginning to fill up. There were no voices. However, it struck me that there was something subtly furtive about the creaking. I did not like it, and debated whether I had better try to sleep at all. This town had some queer people, and there had undoubtedly been several disappearances. Was this one of those inns where travelers were slain for their money? Surely I had no look of excessive prosperity, or were the townsfolk really so resentful about curious visitors? Had my obvious sightseeing with its frequent map consultations aroused unfavorable notice? It occurred to me that I must be in a highly nervous state to let a few random creakings set me off speculating in this fashion, but I regretted none the less that I was unarmed. At length, feeling a fatigue which had nothing of drowsiness in it, I bolted the newly outfitted hall door, turned off the light, and threw myself down on the hard, uneven bed, coat, collar, shoes, and all. In the darkness, every faint noise of the night seemed magnified, and a flood of doubly unpleasant thoughts swept over me. I was sorry I had put out the light, yet was too tired to rise and turn it on again. Then, after a long, dreary interval, and prefaced by a fresh creaking of stairs and corridor, there came a soft, damnably unmistakable sound, which seemed like a malign fulfillment of all my apprehensions. Without the least shadow of a doubt, the lock on my hall door was being tried, cautiously, furtively, tentatively, with a key. My sensations upon recognizing this sign of actual peril were perhaps less rather than more tumultuous because of my previous vague fears. I had been, albeit without definite reason, instinctively on my guard, and that was to my advantage, in the new and real crisis, whatever it might turn out to be. Nevertheless, the change in the menace from vague premonition to immediate reality was a profound shock, and fell upon me with the force of a genuine blow. It never once occurred to me that the fumblings might be a mere mistake. Malign purpose was all I could think of, and I kept deathly quiet, awaiting the would-be intruder's next move. After a time, the cautious rattling ceased, and I heard the room to the north entered with a pass key. Then the lock of the connecting door to my room was softly tried. The bolt held, of course, and I heard the floor creak as a prowler left the room. After a moment there came another soft rattling, and I knew that the room to the south of me was being entered. Again a furtive trying of a bolted connecting door, and again a receding creaking. This time the creaking went along the hall and down the stairs, so I knew that the prowler had realized the bolted condition of my doors and was giving up his attempts for a greater or lesser time, as the future would show. The readiness with which I fell into a plan of action proves that I must have been subconsciously fearing some menace and considering possible avenues of escape for hours. From the first I felt the unseen fumbler meant a danger not to be met or dealt with, but only to be fled from as precipitately as possible. The one thing to do was to get out of that hotel alive as quickly as I could, and through some channel other than the front doors and lobby. Rising softly, and throwing my flashlight on the switch, I sought to light the bulb over my head in order to choose and pocket some belongings for a swift, valleyless flight. Nothing, however, happened, and I saw that the power had been cut off. Clearly, some cryptic, evil movement was afoot on a large scale. Just what, I could not say. As I stood pondering with my hand on the now useless switch, I heard a muffled creaking on the floor below, and thought I could barely distinguish voices in conversation. A moment later, I felt less sure that the deeper sounds were voices, since the apparent hoarse barkings and loose syllabled croakings bore so little resemblance to recognized human speech. Then I thought with renewed force of what the factory inspector had heard in the night in this moldering and pestilential building. Having filled my pockets with the flashlight's aid, I put on my hat and tiptoed to the windows to consider chances of descent. Despite the state's safety regulations, there was no fire escape on this side of the hotel, and I saw that my windows commanded only a sheer 3-story drop to the cobbled courtyard. On the right and left, however, some ancient brick business blocks abutted on the hotel, their slant roofs coming up to a reasonable jumping distance from my 4th-story level. To reach either of these lines of buildings, I would have to be in a room 2 doors from my own, in one case on the north and in the other case on the south, and my mind instantly set to work calculating what chances I had of making the transfer. I could not, I decided, risk an emergence into the corridor, where my footsteps would surely be heard, and where the difficulties of entering the desired room would be insuperable. My progress, if it were to be made at all, would have to be through the less solidly built connecting doors of the rooms, the locks and bolts of which I would have to force violently, using my shoulder as a battering ram whenever they were set against me. This, I thought, would be possible, owing to the rickety nature of the house and its fixtures, but I realized I could not do it noiselessly. I would have to count on sheer speed and the chance of getting into a window before any hostile forces became coordinated enough to open the right door toward me with a pass key. My own outer door I reinforced by pushing the bureau against it, little by little, in order to make a minimum of sound. I perceived that my chances were very slender, and was fully prepared for any calamity. Even getting to another roof would not solve the problem, for there would then remain the task of reaching the ground and escaping from the town. One thing in my favor was the deserted and ruinous state of the abutted buildings, and the number of skylights gaping blackly open in each row. Gathering from the grocery boy's map that the best route out of town was southward, I glanced first at the connecting door on the south side of the room. It was designed to open in my direction, hence I saw, after drawing the bolt and finding other fastenings in place, it was not a favorable one for forcing. Accordingly, abandoning it as a route, I cautiously moved the bedstead against it to hamper any attack which might be made on it later from the next room. The door on the north was hung to open away from me, and this, though a test proved it to be locked or bolted from the other side, I knew must be my route. If I could gain the roofs of the buildings in Payne Street and descend successfully to the ground level, I might perhaps dart through the courtyard and the adjacent or opposite buildings to Washington or Bates, or else emerge in Payne and edge around it southward into Washington. In any case, I would aim to strike Washington somehow and get quickly out of the town square region. My preference would be to avoid Payne, since the fire station there might be open all night. As I thought of these things, I looked out over the squalid sea of decaying roofs below me, now brightened by the beams of a moon not much past full. On the right back gash of the river gorge clothed the panorama, abandoned factories and railway station clinging barnacle-like to its sides. Beyond it, the rusted railway and the Rowley Road led off through a flat, marshy terrain dotted with islets of higher and drier scrub-grown land. On the left, the creek-threatened countryside was nearer, the narrow road to Ipswich gleaming white in the moonlight. I could not see from my side of the hotel the southward route toward Arkham which I had determined to take. I was irresolutely speculating on when I had better attack the northward door, and how I could least audibly manage it, when I noticed that the vague noises underfoot had given place to a fresh and heavier creaking of the stairs. A wavering flicker of light showed through my transom, and the boards of the corridor began to groan with a ponderous load. Muffled sounds of possible vocal origin approached, and at length a firm knock came at my outer door. For a moment I simply held my breath and waited. Eternities seemed to elapse, and the nauseous fishy odor of my environment seemed to mount suddenly and spectacularly. Then the knocking was repeated, continuously, and with growing insistence. I knew that the time for action had come, and forthwith drew the bolt of the northward connecting door, bracing myself for the task of battering it open. The knocking waxed louder, and I hoped that its volume would cover the sound of my efforts. At last, beginning my attempt, I lunged again and again at the thin paneling with my left shoulder. Heedless of shock or pain, the door resisted even more than I had expected. But I did not give in, and all the while the clamor at the outer door increased. Finally, the connecting door gave, but with such a crash that I knew those outside must have heard. Instantly, the outside knocking became a violent battering. While keys sounded ominously in the hall doors of the rooms on both sides of me, rushing through the newly opened connection, I succeeded in bolting the northerly hall door before the lock could be turned. But even as I did so, I heard the hall door of the third room, the one from whose window I had hoped to reach the roof below, being tried with a pass key. For an instant, I felt absolute despair, since my trapping in a chamber with no window egress seemed complete. A wave of almost abnormal horror swept over me, and invested with a terrible but unexplainable singularity that the flashlight glimpsed dust prints made by the intruder who had lately tried my door from this room. Then, with a dazed automatism which persisted despite hopelessness, I made for the next connecting door and performed the blind motion of pushing at it in an effort to get through. And, Granting that fastenings might be as providentially intact as this second room, bolt the hall door beyond before the lock could be turned from outside. Sheer fortunate chance gave me my reprieve, for the connecting door before me was not only unlocked, but actually ajar. In a second I was through, and had my right knee and shoulder against the hall door, which was visibly opening inward. My pressure took the opener off guard, for the thing shut as I pushed, so that I could slip the well-conditioned bolt as I had done with the other door. As I gained this respite, I heard the battering at the two other doors abate, while a confused clatter came from the connecting door I had shielded with the bedstead. Evidently, the bulk of my assailants had entered the southerly room and were massing in a lateral attack. But at the same moment, a pass key sounded in the next door to the north, and I knew that a nearer peril was at hand. The northward connecting door was wide open, but there was no time to think about checking the already turning lock in the hall. All I could do was to shut and bolt the open connecting door, as well as its mate on the opposite side, pushing a bedstead against one and a bureau against the other, moving a washstand in front of the hall door. I must, I saw, trust to such makeshift barriers to shield me till I could get out the window and on the roof of Payne Street block. But even in this acute moment, my chief horror was something apart from the immediate weakness of my defenses. I was shuddering, because not one of my pursuers, despite some hideous paintings, gruntings, and subdued barkings at odd intervals, was uttering an unmuffled or unintelligible vocal sound. As I moved the furniture and rushed toward the windows, I heard a frightful scurrying along the corridor toward the room north of me, and perceived that the southward battering had ceased. Plainly, most of my opponents were about to concentrate against the feeble connecting door, which they knew must open directly on me. Outside, the moon played on the ridgepole of the block below, and I saw that the jump would be desperately hazardous because of the steep surface on which I must land. Surveying the conditions, I chose the more southerly of the two windows as my avenue of escape, planning to land on the inner slope of the roof and make for the nearest skylight. Once inside one of the decrepit brick structures, I would have to reckon with pursuit, but I had hoped to descend and dodge in and out of yawning doorways along the shadowed courtyard, eventually getting to Washington Street and slipping out of town toward the south. The clatter at the northerly connecting door was now terrific, and I saw the weak paneling was beginning to splinter. Obviously, the besiegers had brought some ponderous object into play as a battering ram. The bedstead, however, had held firm, so that I had at least a faint chance of making my escape. As I opened the window, I noticed that it was flanked by heavy velour draperies suspended from a pole by brass rings, and also that there was a large projecting catch from the shutters on the exterior. Seeing a possible means of avoiding the dangerous jump, I yanked at the hangings and brought them down, pole and all, then quickly hooking two of the rings in a shutter catch and flinging the drapery outside. The heavy folds reached fully to the abutting roof, and I saw that the rings and catch would likely bear my weight. So climbing out of the window and down the improvised rope ladder, I left behind me forever the morbid and horror-infested fabric of the Gilman house. I landed safely on the loose slates of the steep roof, and succeeded in gaining the gaping black skylight without a slip. Glancing up at the window I had left, I observed it was still dark, though far across the crumbling chimneys to the north I could see lights ominously blazing in the order of Dagon Hall, the Baptist church, and the Congregational church which I recalled so shiveringly. There had seemed to be no one in the courtyard below, and I had hoped there would be a chance to get away before the spreading of general alarm. Flashing my pocket lamp into the skylight, I saw there were no steps down. The distance was slight, however, so I clambered over the brink and dropped, striking a dusty floor littered with crumbling boxes and barrels. The place was ghoulish looking, but I was past minding such impressions and made at once for the staircase revealed by my flashlight. After a hasty glance at my watch, which showed the hour to be 2 a.m., the steps creaked, but seemed tolerably sound, and I raced down past a barn-like second story to the ground floor. The desolation was complete, and only echoes answered my footfalls. At length I reached the lower hall, at one end of which I saw a faint luminous rectangle marking the ruined Payne Street doorway. Heading the other way, I found the back door also open, and darted out and down 5 stone steps to the grass-grown cobblestones of the courtyard. The moonbeams did not reach down here, but I could just see my way about without using the flashlight. Some of the windows on Gilman House side were faintly glowing, and I thought I heard confused sounds within. Walking softly over to Washington Street side, I perceived several open doorways, and chose the nearest as my route out. The hallway inside was black, and when I reached the opposite end, I saw that the street door was wedged, immovably shut. Resolved to try another building, I groped my way back toward the courtyard, but stopped short when close to the doorway. For out of an open door in the Gilman house, a large crowd of doubtful shapes was pouring, lanterns bobbing in the darkness, and horrible croaking voices exchanging low cries in what was certainly not English. The figures moved uncertainly, and I realized to my relief that they did not know where I had gone. But for all that they sent a shiver of horror through my frame. Their features were indistinguishable, but their crouching, shambling gait was abominably repellent. And worst of all, I perceived that one figure was strangely robed, and unmistakably surmounted by a tall tiara of a design altogether too familiar. As the figures spread through the courtyard, I felt my fears increase. Suppose I could find no egress from this building on the street side. The fishy odor was detestable, and I wondered I could stand it without fainting. Again, groping towards the street, I opened a door off the hall and came upon an empty room with closely shuttered but sashless windows. Fumbling in the rays of my flashlight, I found I could open the shutters, and in another moment had climbed outside and was carefully closing the aperture in its original manner. I was now in Washington Street, and for the moment I saw no living thing, not any light save for that of the moon, from several directions in the distance. However, I could hear the sound of hoarse voices, of footsteps, and of a curious kind of pattering which did not sound quite like footsteps. Plainly, I had no time to lose. The points of the compass were clear to me, and I was glad that all the streetlights were turned off, as is often the custom on strongly moonlit nights in unprosperous rural regions. Some of the sounds came from the south, yet I retained my design of escaping that direction. There would, I knew, be plenty of deserted doorways to shelter me in case I met any person or group who looked like pursuers. I walked rapidly, softly, and close to the ruined houses. While hatless and disheveled after my arduous climb, I did not look especially noticeable, and stood a good chance of passing unheeded if forced to encounter any casual wayfarer. At Bates Street, I drew into a yawning vestibule while 2 shambling figures crossed in front of me, but was soon on my way again, and approaching the open space where Elliott Street obliquely crosses Washington at the intersection of the South. Though I had never seen this place, it had looked dangerous to me on the grocery youth's map, since the moonlight would have free play there. There was no use trying to evade it, for any alternative course would involve detours of possibly disastrous visibility and delaying effect. The only thing to do was to cross it boldly and openly, imitating the typical shamble of the Innsmouth folk as best I could, and trusting that no one, or at least no pursuer of mine, would be there. Just how fully the pursuit was organized, and indeed just what its purpose might be, I could form no idea. There seemed to be unusual activity in the town, but I judged that the news of my escape from the Gilman had not yet spread. I would, of course, soon have to shift from Washington to some other southward street. For that party from the hotel would doubtless be after me. I must have left dust prints in that last old building, revealing how I had gained the street. The open space was, as I had expected, strongly moonlit, and I saw the remains of a park-like, iron-railed green at its center. Fortunately, no one was about, though a curious sort of buzz or roar seemed to be increasing in the direction of Town Square. South Street was very wide, leading directly down a slight declivity to the waterfront and commanding a long view out at sea, and I hoped that no one would be glancing up it from afar as I crossed into the bright moonlight. My progress was unimpeded, and no fresh sound arose to hint that I had been spied. Glancing about me, I involuntarily let my pace slacken for a second to take in the sight of the sea, gorgeous in the burning moonlight at the street's end. Far out beyond the breakwater was the dim dark line of Devil Reef, and as I glimpsed it, I could not help thinking of all the hideous legends I had heard in the last 34 hours. Legends which portrayed this ragged rock as a veritable gateway to realms of unfathomed horror and inconceivable abnormality. Then, without warning, I saw the intermittent flashes of light on the distant reef. They were definite and unmistakable, and awaked in my mind a blind horror beyond all rational proportion. My muscles tightened for panic flight, held in only by a certain unconscious caution and half-hypnotic fascination. And to make matters worse, there now flashed forth from the lofty cupola of Gilman House, which loomed up to the northeast behind me, a series of analogous, though differently spaced gleams, which could be nothing less than an answering signal. Controlling my muscles and realizing afresh how plainly visible I was, I resumed my brisker and feignedly shambling pace, though keeping my eyes on the hellish and ominous reef as long as the opening of South Street gave me a seaward view. What the whole proceeding meant, I could not imagine, unless it involved some strange rite reconnected with Devil Reef, or unless some party had landed from a ship on that sinister rock. I now bent to the left around the ruinous green, still gazing toward the ocean as it blazed in the spectral summer moonlight, and watching the cryptical flashing of those nameless, unexplainable beacons. It was then that the most horrible impression of all was borne in upon me, the impression which destroyed my last vestige of self-control and set me running frantically southward past the yawning black doorways and fishily staring windows of that deserted nightmare street. For at a closer glance, I saw that the moonlit waters between the reef and shore were far from empty. They were alive with a teeming horde of shapes swimming inward toward the town, and even at my vast distance and in my single moment of perception, I could tell that the bobbing heads and flailing arms were alien and aberrant in a way scarcely to be expressed or consciously formulated. My frantic running ceased before I had covered a block, for at my left I began to hear something like the hue and cry of organized pursuit. There were footsteps and guttural sounds, and a rattling motor wheezed south along Federal Street. In a second, all my plans were utterly changed, for if the southward highway were blocked ahead of me, I must clearly find another egress from Innsmouth. I paused and drew into a gaping doorway, reflecting how lucky I was to have left the moonlit open space before these pursuers came down to the parallel street. A second reflection was less comforting. Since the pursuit was down another street, it was plain that the party was not following me directly. It had not seen me, but was simply obeying a general plan of cutting off my escape. This, however, implied that all roads leading out of Innsmouth were similarly patrolled, for the denizens could not have known what route I intended to take. If this were so, I would have to make my retreat across the country, away from any road. But how could I do that, in view of the marshy and creek-riddled nature of all the surrounding region? For a moment my brain needed, both from sheer hopelessness and from a rapid increase in the omnipresent fishy odor. I'm going to take a short break. I'm going to get a drink of water. Someone says this sounds like it was written from AI. Well, I mean, AI researches all the writing and like bases its own writing on what's already written. But yeah, it's like the author was just like spinning his wheels in a panic attack or something. It's like this does feel like panic attack core or existential crisis core. Like, have you ever had an existential crisis and written down everything you were feeling and gone back and read it? Okay. I'm gonna take a short break. Like, give me like 2 minutes. I'll be right back. Okay, I return. Okay. Where were we? Okay. Then I thought of the abandoned railway to Rowley, whose solid line of ballasted weed-grown earth still stretched off to the northwest from the crumbling station on the edge of the river gorge. There was just a chance that the townsfolk would not think of that, since its briar-choked desertion made it half impassable, and the unlikeliest of all avenues for a fugitive to choose. I had seen it clearly from my hotel window, and knew about how it lay. Most of its earlier length was uncomfortably visible from the Raleigh Road, and from high places in the town itself. But one could perhaps crawl inconspicuously through the undergrowth. At any rate, it would form my only chance of deliverance, and there was nothing to do but try it. Drawing inside the hall of my deserted shelter, I once more consulted the grocery boy's map with the aid of the flashlight. The immediate problem was how to reach the ancient railway, and now I saw the safest course was ahead to Babson Street, then west to Lafayette, there edging around but not crossing an open space homologous to the one I had traversed, and subsequently back northward and westward in a zigzagging line through Lafayette, Bates, Adams, and Bank Streets, the latter skirting the river gorge, to the abandoned and dilapidated station I had seen from my window. My reason for going ahead to Babson was that I wished neither to recross the earlier open space nor to begin my westward course along a cross street as broad as south. Starting once more, I crossed the street to the right-hand side in order to edge around into Babson as inconspicuously as possible. Noises still continued in Federal Street, and as I glanced behind me, I thought I saw a gleam of light near the building which I had escaped. Anxious to leave Washington Street, I broke into a quiet dog trot, trusting to luck not to encounter any observing eye. Next the corner of Babson Street, I saw to my alarm that one of the houses was still inhabited, as attested by curtains at the window, but when there was no lights within, as I passed it without disaster. In Babson Street, which crossed Federal, and might thus reveal me to the searchers, I clung as closely as possible to the sagging, uneven buildings, twice pausing in a doorway as the noises behind me momentarily increased. The open space ahead shone wide and desolate under the moon, but my route would not force me to cross it. During my second pause, I began to detect a fresh distribution of the vague sounds, and upon looking cautiously out from a cover behind a motor car darting across an open space, bound outward along Elliott Street, which there intersects both Babson and Lafayette. As I watched, choked by a sudden rise in the fishy odor after a short abatement, I saw a band of uncouth, crouching shapes loping and shambling in the same direction, and knew that this must be the party guarding the Ipswich Road, since that highway forms an extension of Elliott Street. Two of the figures I glimpsed were in voluminous robes, and one wore a peaked diadem which glistened whitely in the moonlight. The gait of this figure was so odd that it sent a chill through me, for it seemed to me the creature was almost hopping. When the last of the band was out of sight, I resumed my progress, darting around the corner into Lafayette Street, and crossing Elliott very hurriedly, lest stragglers of the party be still advancing along that thoroughfare. I did hear some croaking and clattering sounds far off toward Town Square, but accomplished the passage without disaster. My greatest dread was in recrossing broad and moonlit South Street, with its seaward view, and I had to nerve myself for the ordeal. Someone might easily be looking, and possible Elliott Street stragglers could not fail to glimpse me from either of 2 points. At the last moment, I decided I had better slacken my trot and make the crossing as before in the shambling gait of an average Innsmouth native. When the view of the water again opened out, this time on my right. I was half determined not to look at it at all. I could not, however, resist, but cast a sidelong glance as I carefully and imitatively shambled toward the protecting shadows ahead. There was no ship visible, as I had half expected there would be. Instead, the first thing which caught my eye was a small rowboat pulling in toward the abandoned wharves and laden with some bulky tarpaulin-covered object. Its rowers, though distantly and indistinctly seen, were of an especially repellent aspect. Several swimmers were still discernible, while on the far black reef I could see a faint, steady glow, unlike the winking beacon visible before, and of a curious color which I could not precisely identify. Above the slant roofs ahead and to the right there loomed the tall cupola of the Gilman house, but it was completely dark. The fishy odor, dispelled for a moment by some merciful breeze, now closed in again with maddening intensity. I had not quite crossed the North Street when I heard a muttering band advancing along Washington from the north. As they reached the broad open space where I had had my first disquieting glimpse of the moonlight water, I could see them plainly only a block away, and was horrified by the bestial abnormality of their faces and the dog-like subhumanness of their crouching gait. One man moved in a positively simian way, with long arms frequently touching the ground, while another figure, robed and tiaraed, seemed to progress in an almost hopping fashion. I judged this party to be one I had seen in Gilman's courtyard, the one therefore most closely on my tail. And some of the figures turned to look in my direction. I was transfixed with fright, yet managed to preserve the casual, shambling gait I had assumed. To this day, I do not know whether they saw me or not. If they did, my stratagem must have deceived them, for they passed on across the moonlit space without varying their course, meanwhile croaking and jabbering in some hateful guttural patois I could not identify. Once more in shadow, I resumed my former dog trot past the leaning and decrepit houses that stared blankly into the night. Having crossed to the western sidewalk, I rounded the nearest corner into Bates Street, where I kept close to the buildings on the southern side. I passed two houses showing signs of habitation, one of which had faint lights in upper rooms, yet met with no obstacle. As I turned into Adams Street, I felt measurably safer, but received a shock when a man reeled out of a black doorway directly in front of me. He proved, however, too hopelessly drunk to be a menace, so that I reached the dismal ruins of the Bank Street warehouses in safety. No one was stirring in the dead street beside the river gorge, and the roar of the waterfalls quite drowned my footsteps. It was a long dog trot to the ruined station, and the great brick warehouse walls around me seemed somehow more terrifying than the fronts of private houses. At last I saw the ancient arcaded station, or what was left of it, and made directly for the tracks that started from its farther end. Okay, water break. Thank you, Orist, for telling people what's up. I'm gonna move the light a little bit and see if I can make it better. Okay, that is better. I had to have the light in a different position because the dog was sleeping, and you can't disturb a sleeping animal. It's like the law. So, yeah, it'll be better now. Okay, where was I? No one was stirring in that dead street beside the river gorge. Oh, let me see. The vast barn-like ledge length of the old bridge gleamed spectrally in the moonlight, and I saw that the ties were safe for at least a few feet within. Hang on one second. Come on. Come up. Okay. Come on. Come on. Come on. Come on. Come on. Yeah. Come on. I'm babysitting an old arthritic dog. He's come to keep me company. It's his bedtime. We're chilling. Okay. I just want to say, I'm going to take this moment. If someone, like my phone is on live stream, but if someone can look up the number for the suicide hotline for Tim, I think that's a good idea. But I'm going to continue because I'm not qualified to deal with that. Okay? Thank you. Tim, I hope you get the help you need, okay? Yeah, Martello, since you're modding, if you can grab the number for the suicide hotline, like that would be so amazing. I would really appreciate that. Okay, give me 1 minute. I'm gonna find where I was. Greengrass asks, any advice? I have no women. Greengrass, you gotta find what makes you happy and do that. And don't stress. Do what makes you happy and go have fun. Okay. Okay. The rails were rusty, but mainly intact, and not more than half the ties had rotted away. Walking or running on such a surface was very difficult, but I did my best, and on the whole made very fair time. For some distance the line kept on along the gorge's brink, but at length I reached the long covered bridge where it crossed the chasm at a dizzy height. The condition of this bridge would determine my next step. If humanly possible, I would use it. If not, I would have to risk more street wandering and take the nearest intact highway bridge. This vast barn-like length of old bridge gleamed spectrally in the moonlight, and I saw that the ties were safe for at least a few feet within. Entering, I began to use my flashlight, and was almost knocked down by the cloud of bats that flapped past me. About halfway across, there was a perilous gap in the ties which I feared for a moment would halt me, but in the end I risked a desperate jump which fortunately succeeded. I was glad to see the moonlight again when I emerged from that macabre tunnel. The old tracks crossed River Street at grade, and at once veered off into a region increasingly rural and with less and less of Innsmouth abhorrent fishy odor. Here, the dense growth of weeds and briars hindered me and cruelly tore at my clothes, but I was none the less glad they were there to give me the concealment in case of peril. I knew that much of my route must be visible from Rowley Road. The marshy region began very shortly, with a single track on a low grassy embankment, where the weedy growth was somewhat thinner. Then came a sort of island on higher ground, where the line passed through a shallow open cut choked with bushes and brambles. I was very glad of this partial shelter, since at this point the Rowley Road wasn't uncomfortably near, according to my window view. At the end of the cut, it would cross the track and swerve off to a safer distance. But meanwhile, I must be exceedingly careful. I was by this time thankfully certain the railway itself was not patrolled. Just before entering the cut, I glanced behind me, but saw no pursuer. The ancient spires and roofs of decaying Innsmouth gleamed lovely and ethereal in the magic yellow moonlight, and I thought of how they must have looked in the old days before the shadow fell. Then, as my gaze circled inland from the town, something less tranquil arrested my notice and held me immobile for a second. What I saw, or fancied I saw, was a disturbing suggestion of undulant motion far to the south, a suggestion which made me conclude that a very large horde must be pouring out of the city along the level Ipswich road. The distance was great, and I could distinguish nothing in detail, but I did not at all like the look of that moving column. It undulated too much, and glistened too brightly in the rays of the now westerning moon. There was a suggestion of sound, too, though the wind was blowing the other way, a suggestion of bestial scraping and bellowing even worse than the muttering of the parties I had lately overheard. All sorts of unpleasant conjectures crossed my mind. I thought of those very extreme Innsmouth types said to be hidden in crumbling centuried warrens near the waterfront. I thought, too, of those nameless swimmers I had seen, counting the parties so far glimpsed, as well as those presumably covering other roads. The number of my pursuers must be strangely large for a town as depopulated as Innsmouth. Whence could come these dense personnel of such a column as I now beheld? Did those ancient unplumbed warrens teem with a twisted, uncatalogued, and unsuspected life? Or had some unseen ship indeed landed a legion of unknown outsiders on that hellish reef? Who were they? Why were they here? And if such a column of them was scouring the Ipswich road, would the patrols of the other roads be likewise augmented? I had entered the brush-grown cut and was struggling along at a very slow pace when that damnable fishy odor again waxed dominant. Had the wind suddenly changed eastward so that it blew in from the sea over the town? It must have, I concluded, since I now began to hear shocking guttural murmurs from the hitherto silent direction. There was another sound, too, a kind of wholesale colossal flopping or pattering, which somehow called up images of the most detestable sort. It made me think illogically of that unpleasantly undulating column on the far-off Ipswich road. And then both stench and sounds grew stronger, so that I paused shivering and grateful for the cut's protection. It was here, I recalled, that the Rowley Road drew so close to the old railway before crossing westward and diverging. Something was so close to the old railway before crossing westward. Oh, something was coming along that road, and I must lie low till its passage and vanishment in the distance. Thank heaven these creatures employed no dogs for tracking, though perhaps that would have been impossible amidst the omnipresent regional odor. Crouched in the bushes of that sandy cleft, I felt reasonably safe, even though I knew the searchers would have to cross the track in front of me, not much more than 100 yards away. I would be able to see them, but they could not, except by a malign miracle, see me. All at once, I began dreading to look at them as they passed. I saw the close moonlit space where they would surge by, and had curious thoughts about the irredeemable pollution of that space. They would perhaps be worst of all Innsmouth types, something one would not care to remember. The stench waxed overpowering, and the noises swelled to a bestial babble of croaking, baying, and barking without the least suggestion of human speech. Were these indeed the voices of my pursuers? Did they have dogs after all? As far as I had seen none of the lower animals in Innsmouth. That flopping or pattering was monstrous. I could not look up upon the degenerate creatures responsible for it. I would keep my eyes still, shut till the sounds receded toward the west. The horde was very close now, the air foul with their hoarse snarlings, and the ground almost shaking with their alien-rhythmed footfalls. My breath nearly ceased to come. I put every ounce of willpower into the task of holding my eyelids down. I am not even yet willing to say whether what followed was a hideous actuality or only a nightmare hallucination. The later action of the government, after my frantic appeals, would tend to confirm it as a monstrous truth. But could not an hallucination have been repeated under the quasi-hypnotic spell of that ancient, haunted, and shadowed town? Such places have strange properties, and the legacy of insane legend might well have acted on more than one human imagination. Amidst those dead, stench-cursed streets and huddled of rotting roofs and crumbling steeples, is it not possible that the germ of an actual contagious madness lurks in the depths of that shadow over Innsmouth? Who can be sure of reality after hearing things like the tale of old Zadok Allen? The government and men never found poor Zadok, and have no conjectures to make as of what became of him. Where does madness leave off and reality begin? Is it possible that even my latest fear is sheer delusion? But I must try to tell what I thought I saw that night under the mocking yellow moon. I saw surging and hopping down the Rowley Road in plain sight in front of me as I crouched along the wild brambles of that desolate railway cut. Of course, my resolution to keep my eyes shut had failed. It was foredoomed to failure, for who could crouch blindly while a legion of croaking, baying entities of unknown source flopped noisomely past, scarcely more than 100 yards away? I thought I was prepared for the worst, and I really ought to have been prepared considering what I had seen before. My other pursuers had been accursedly abnormal. So should I not have been ready to face a strengthening of the abnormal element? To look upon forms in which there was no mixture of the normal at all? I did not open my eyes until the raucous clamor came loudly from a point obviously straight ahead. Then I knew that a long section of them must be plainly in sight where the sides of the cut flattened out and the road crossed the track. I could no longer keep myself from sampling whatever horror that leering yellow moon might have to show. It was the end, for whatever remains to me of life on the surface of this earth, of every vestige of mental peace and confidence in the integrity of nature and of the human mind. Nothing that I could have imagined, nothing even that I could have gathered, had I credited old Zadok's crazy tale in the most literal way, would be in any way comparable to the demonic blasphemous reality that I saw, or believe I saw. I have tried to hint at what it was in order to postpone the horror of writing it down baldly. Can it be possible that this planet has actually spawned such things? That human eyes have truly seen, as objective flesh, what man has hitherto known as only in febrile fantasy and tenuous legend? And yet I saw them, in a limitless stream, flopping, hopping, croaking, bleeding, surging inhumanly through the spectral moonlight in a grotesque, malignant saraband of fantastic nightmare, and some of them had tall tiaras of that nameless whitish gold metal, and some were strangely robed, and one, who led the way, was clad in a ghoulishly humped black coat and striped trousers, and had a man's felt hat perched on his shapeless thing that answered for a head. I think their predominant color was grayish-green, though they had white bellies. They were mostly shiny and slippery, but the ridges of their backs were scaly. Their forms vaguely suggested their anthropoid, while their heads were the heads of fish, with prodigious bulging eyes that never closed, and the sides of their necks were palpitating gills. Their long paws were webbed. They hopped irregularly, sometimes on 2 legs, and sometimes on 4. I was somehow glad that they had no more than 4 limbs. Their croaking, baying voices, clearly used for articulate speech, held all the dark shades of expression which their staring faces lacked. But for all their monstrousness, they were not unfamiliar to me. I knew too well what they must be, for was not the memory of the evil tiara at Newburyport still fresh? They were the blasphemous fish frogs of the nameless design, living and horrible. And as I saw them, I knew also of what that humped, tiaraed priest in the black church basement had so fearsomely reminded me. Their number was past guessing. It seemed to me that there were limitless swarms of them, and certainly my momentary glimpse could have shown only at least fraction. In another instant, everything was blotted out by a merciful fit of fainting, for the first I ever had. It was a gentle daylight rain that awakened me from my stupor in the brush-grown railway cut, and when I staggered out to the roadway ahead, I saw no traces of any fresh prints in the mud. The fishy odor, too, was gone. Innsmouth's ruined roofs and toppling steeples loomed up grayly toward the southeast. But not a living creature did I spy in all that desolate salt marshes around. My watch was still going, and told me that the hour was past noon. The reality of what I had been through was highly uncertain in my mind, but I felt something hideous lay in the background. I must get away from the evil-shadowed Innsmouth, and accordingly I began to test my cramped, wearied powers of locomotion. Despite weakness, hunger, horror, and bewilderment, I found myself after a time to be able to walk. So started slowly along the muddy road to Rowley. Before evening I was in the village, getting a meal and providing myself with presentable clothes. I caught the night train to Arkham, and the next day talked long and earnestly with the government officials there, a process I later repeated in Boston. With the main result of these colloquies in public, the public is now familiar, and I wish for normality's sake there was nothing more to tell. Perhaps it is madness that is overtaking me, yet perhaps a greater horror, or a greater marvel, is reaching out. As may well be imagined, I gave up most of the foreplanned features of the rest of my tour, the scenic, architectural, and antiquarian diversions on which I had counted so heavily. Nor did I dare look for that piece of strange jewelry said to be in Miskatonic University and Museum. I did, however, improve my stay in Arkham by collecting some genealogical notes I had long wished to possess. Very rough and hasty data, it is true, but capable of good use later on when I might have time to collate and codify them. The curator of this historical society was there. Mr. E. Lapham Peabody was very courteous about assisting me, and expressed unusual interest when I told him I was a grandson of Eliza Orne of Arkham, who was born in 1867 and had married James Williamson of Ohio at age of 17. It seemed that a maternal uncle of mine had been there many years before on a quest much like my own, and that my grandmother's family was a topic of some local curiosity. There had, Mr. Peabody said, been considerable discussion about the marriage of her father, Benjamin Orne, just after the Civil War. Since the ancestry of the bride was peculiarly puzzling, that bride was understood to have been an orphaned Marsh of New Hampshire, a cousin of the Essex County Marshes, but her education had been in France, and she knew very little of her family. A guardian had deposited funds in a Boston bank to maintain her and her French governess, but that guardian's name was unfamiliar to Arkham people, and the time he dropped out of sight so that the governess assumed his role by court appointment. The Frenchwoman, now long dead, was very taciturn, and there were those who said she could have told more than she did. But the most baffling thing was the inability of anyone to place the recorded parents of the young woman, Enoch and Lydia Meserve Marsh, among the known families of New Hampshire. Possibly, many suggested, she was the natural daughter of some Marsh of prominence. She certainly had true Marsh eyes. Most of the puzzling was done after her early death, which took place at the birth of my grandmother, her only child. Having formed some disagreeable impressions connected with the name of Marsh, I did not welcome the news that it belonged on my own ancestral tree. Nor was I pleased by Mr. Peabody's suggestion that I had the true Marsh eyes myself. However, I was grateful for the data which I knew would prove valuable, and took copious notes and lists of book references regarding the well-documented Orne family. I went directly home to Toledo from Boston, and later spent a month at the Maumee recuperating from my ordeal. In September, I entered Oberlin for my final year, and from then till next June was busy with studies and other wholesome activities, reminded of the bygone terror only by occasional official visits from government men in connection with the campaign which my pleas and evidence had started. Around the middle of July, just a year after the Innsmouth experience, I spent a week with my late mother's family in Cleveland, checking some of my new genealogical data with the various notes, traditions, and bits of heirloom material in existence there, and seeing what kind of connected chart I could construct. I did not exactly relish this task, for the atmosphere of the Williamson home had always depressed me. There was a strain of morbidity there, and my mother had never encouraged my visiting her parents as a child, although she always welcomed father when he came to Toledo. My Arkham-born grandmother had seemed strange and almost terrifying to me, and I do not think I grieved when she disappeared. I was 8 years old then, and it was said that she had wandered off in grief after the suicide of my Uncle Douglas, her eldest son. He had shot himself after a trip to New England, the same trip, no doubt, which had caused him to be recalled at the Arkham Historical Society. This uncle had resembled her, and I had never liked him either. Something about the staring, unwinking expression of both of them had given me a vague, unaccountable uneasiness. My mother and Uncle Walter had not looked like that. They were like their father, though poor little cousin Lawrence, Walter's son, had been an almost perfect duplicate of his grandmother before his condition took him to the permanent seclusion of a sanitarium at Canton. I had not seen him in 4 years, but my uncle once implied that his state, both mental and physical, was very bad. This worry had probably been a major cause of his mother's death 2 years before. My grandmother and his widowed son Walter now comprised the Cleveland household, but the memory of older times hung thickly over it. I still disliked the place, and tried to get my researches done as quickly as possible. Williamson records and traditions were supplied in abundance by my grandfather, though for Orne material I had to depend on my Uncle Walter, who put at my disposal the contents of all his files, including notes, letters, cuttings, heirlooms, photographs, and miniatures. It was in going over the letters and pictures on the Orne side that I began to acquire a kind of terror of my own ancestry. As I have said, my grandmother and Uncle Douglas have always disturbed me. Now, years after them passing, I gained at their pictured faces with immeasurably heightened feeling of repulsion and alienation. I could not at first understand the change, but gradually a horrible sort of comparison began to obtrude itself on my unconscious mind, despite the steady refusal of my consciousness to admit even the least suspicion of it. It was clear that the typical expression of these faces now suggested something it had not suggested before. Something which would bring stark panic if too openly thought of. But the worst shock came when my uncle showed me the Orne jewelry in a downtown safe deposit vault. Some of the items were delicate and inspiring enough, but there was one box of strange old pieces descending from my mysterious great-grandmother, which my uncle was almost reluctant to produce. They were, he said, of very grotesque and almost repulsive design, and had never to his knowledge been publicly worn. Though my grandmother used to enjoy looking at them, the vague legends of bad luck clustered around them. And my great-grandmother's French governess had said they ought not to be worn in New England, though it would be quite safe to wear them in Europe. As my uncle began slowly and grudgingly to unwrap the things, he urged me not to be shocked by the strangeness and frequent hideousness of the designs. Artists and archaeologists who had seen them pronounced the workmanship superlatively and exotically exquisite, though no one seemed able to define their exact material or assign them to any specific art tradition. There were 2 amulets, a tiara, and a kind of pectoral, the latter having in high relief certain figures of almost unbearable extravagance. During this description, I kept a tight rein on my emotions, but my face must have betrayed my mounting fears. My uncle looked concerned, and paused in his unwrapping to study my countenance. I motioned him to continue, which he did with renewed signs of reluctance. He seemed to expect some demonstration when the first piece, the tiara, became visible, but I doubt if he expected quite what actually happened. I did not expect it either, for I thought I was thoroughly forewarned regarding what the jewelry would turn out to be. What I did was to faint silently away, just as I had done in that briar-choked railway cut a year before. From that day on, my life has been a nightmare of brooding and apprehension, nor do I know how much is hideous truth and how much madness. My great-grandmother had been of a marsh unknown source, whose husband lived in Arkham, and did not old Zadok say that the daughter of Obed Marsh by a monstrous mother was married to an Arkham man through a trick? What was it that ancient toper had muttered about the likeness of my eyes to Captain Obed's? In Arkham, too, the curator had told me I had the true Marsh eyes. Was Obed Marsh my own great-grandfather? Who, or what, then, was my great-great-grandmother? But perhaps this was all madness. Those whitish gold ornaments might easily have been bought from some Innsmouth sailor by the father of my great-grandmother, whoever he was. And that look in the staring-eyed faces of my grandmother and self-slain uncle might be sheer fancy on my part, sheer fancy bolstered up by the Innsmouth shadow which had so darkly colored my imagination. But why had my uncle killed himself after an ancestral quest in New England? For more than 2 years I fought off these reflections with partial success. My father secured me a place in an insurance office, and I buried myself in routine as deeply as possible. In winter of 1930 to 1931, however, the dreams began. They were very sparse and insidious at first, but increased in frequency and vividness. Wander as the weeks went by. Great watery spaces opened out in front of me. I seemed to wander through titanic sunken porticos and labyrinths of weedy cyclopean walls with grotesque fishes as my companions. Then the other shapes began to appear, filling me with nameless horror the moments I awoke. But during the dreams they did not horrify me at all. I was one with them, wearing their inhuman trappings, treading their aqueous ways, praying monstrously at their evil sea-bottom temples. There was much more than I could remember, but even what I did remember each morning would be enough to stamp me as a madman or a genius if I ever dared write it down. Some frightful influence, I felt, was seeking gradually to drag me out of the sane world of wholesome life into unnameable abysses of blackness and alienage. And the process told heavily on me. My health and appearance grew steadily worse, till finally I was forced to give up my position and adopt the static, secluded life of an invalid. Some odd nervous affliction had me in its grip, and I found myself at times almost unable to shut my eyes. It was then that I began to study the mirror with mounting alarm. The slow ravages of disease are not pleasant to watch, but in my case there was something subtler and more puzzling in the background. My father seemed to notice it too, for he began looking at me curiously and almost affrightedly. What was taking place in me? Could it be that I was coming to resemble my grandmother and Uncle Douglas? One night I had a frightful dream in which I met my grandmother under the sea. She lived in a phosphorescent palace of many terraces, with gardens of strange leprous corals and grotesque brachiate efflorescences, and welcomed me with a warmth that may have been sardonic. She had changed, as those who take to the water change, and told me she had never died. Instead, she had gone to a spot her dead son had learned about, and had leaped to a realm whose wonders, destined for him as well, he had spurned with a smoking pistol. This was to be my realm too. I could not escape it. I would never die, but would live with those who had lived since before man ever walked the earth. I met also that which had been her grandmother. For 80,000 years, Pthathialoi had lived in Yahanathli, and thither she had gone back after Obed Marsh was dead. Yahanathli was not destroyed when the upper earth men shot death into the sea. It was hurt, but not destroyed. The deep ones could never be destroyed, even though the Paleogean magic of the forgotten old ones might sometimes check them. For the present they would rest. But some day, if they remembered, they would rise again for the tribute great Cthulhu craved. It would be a city greater than Innsmouth next time. They had planned to spread, and had brought up that which would help them. But now they must wait once more. For bringing the upper earth men's death, I must do a penance. But that would not be heavy. This was the dream which I saw Shoggoth for the first time. The sight set me awake in a frenzy of screaming. That morning, the mirror definitely told me I had acquired the Innsmouth look. So far I have not shot myself, as my Uncle Douglas did. I bought an automatic and almost took the step. But certain dreams deterred me. The tense extremes of horror are lessening, and I feel queerly drawn toward the unknown sea deeps. Instead of fearing them, I hear and do strange things in sleep, and awake, in a kind of exultation instead of terror. I do not believe I need to wait for the full change, as most have waited. If I did, my father would probably shut me up in a sanitarium, as my poor little cousin is shut up. Stupendous and unheard of splendors await me below, and I shall seek them soon. Ya Ralae, Cthulhu Flan. Ya, no, I shall not shoot myself. I cannot be made to shoot myself. I shall plan my cousin's escape from that Canton madhouse, and together we shall go to the marvel-shadowed Innsmouth. We all shall swim out to that brooding reef in the sea, and dive down through black abysses to cyclopean and many-columned Yanathle. and in that lair of the deep ones we shall dwell amidst wonder and glory forever. Okay, you guys, that was long. Stephen Vieira says, Aloha from Hawaii. What island are you on? I love that story. I love it so much. At first, he's horrified about who he is, and then he rolls with it. Steven, you're on Oahu. How cool. I lived there for a year. What area of Oahu? I loved Oahu. I used to go snorkeling at Sharks Cove like every week. It's definitely creepy because it gets pretty deep there. So I would go snorkeling and try not to think about how deep it goes down or what's. Oh, Waianae. Like East Side Country area, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Waianae is beautiful. Oh yeah, Haliva is beautiful also. Oh, I heard that Haliva, there is like this building like project trying to happen in Haliva and it's like not gonna be locals anymore, which like really sucks if that's the case. Cause like Haliva was cool when it was like locals and old houses and stuff. Yeah, North Shore. I have never scuba dived, but if the chance came, I would love to. Hawaii is being stolen more and more every year. That sucks. I heard that Oprah bought like a huge chunk of Maui and like made a reserve so that no corporations can buy it. And I think that is like the coolest thing I've ever heard in my life. I wish we could do that with like all of Hawaii because there's like very important plants on Hawaii and like really important ecosystems that like need to be protected. And the more corporations get away with putting houses on that land, the more it endangers those ecosystems that are needed to restore balance. There's some really important plants. Waimea? Yeah, I've been to Waimea Beach. I love Waimea. There's a botanical garden um by Waimea Bay. It's like one of my favorite places on earth. It's incredibly beautiful. Um, if you ever have the chance to be able to go see the botanical garden by Waimea Bay, it is incredibly beautiful. There's a waterfall and you can go swim. You can like float in the water and go chill there. And there's like all sorts of gingers and like lily pads and like it's really cool. I don't know. I mean, the locals told me Oprah is pretty cool. So like I don't know what happened to her land. Maybe something has changed since then, but like the locals seem to really like Oprah for buying that big chunk of Maui. But yeah, it's been a while. It's been a few years since I've been there, but I Really miss it. Anyway, that's all I got, you guys. Unless there's like something else. Let me like. Oh, what was the other story that we were talking about? Let me see if the book has it. Heard she has a secret lab there, and that's where the secret zombie virus is. I feel like zombie virus is like when people shop at the mall all day and listen to the bland music. That's enough of a zombie virus. I feel like, don't you feel like there's a lot of people who are just zombie versions of humans? Like, I feel like there's a lot of people who are basically zombies walking around among us all the time. Like, don't you ever feel that way? The Whisper in the Darkness is in this book. Let's see how long it is. Dude, it's long. That's like a 60-page story. I think I'm gonna have to save it for another day. Let me see. I think that half a story is about all I can do today. Like I'm a little bit like reading out, kind of just ready to chill and maybe eat some hot Cheeto chicharron. It's like kind of tired, man. I need a food break. Have I ever seen the movie with Nicolas Cage? I've seen Mandy, and like I can't remember what other of his movies I've seen. It's been a long time. Nicolas Cage. At first, I didn't understand, like, how could a guy like that. No, I'm not gonna say it. Never mind. He's such a strange character, you know? Like, I feel like his freak out energy, like, I understand that. Because if you saw me as a child, it was like that kind of spastic energy. Just like weird freaking out. Like, I really resonate with that. But, like, I'm surprised that you can be an actor and have that kind of weird spastic energy. I don't think I've ever seen Kick-Ass. There's a lot of movies I haven't seen. Oh my god, these are so good right now. These are making my inner child like really happy. I feel like me at 9 years old was addicted to hot Cheetos. You guys are naming off a bunch of stuff. Yeah, he's related to Francis Coppola. Apparently that's like a big reason, like how his career got started. There's like a lot to live up to too. Okay, I kind of like this though. What else are your favorite movies like today? What movies are on your mind? I feel like, okay, this is really strange, but I was thinking about Fern Gully again today, which is weird. It's like I almost never think about that movie, but lately I think about it a lot. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Yes. I was obsessed with that movie when I was like 4 years old. Meet Joe Black is a weird one. Oh my god. Do a line? I don't know. All I can think of is patty cake. Like I can't remember any lines. Like I would have to watch it. I can't remember. Like I have holes in my brain, so I can't remember any lines. Yeah. In Meet Joe Black, Brad Pitt scares me. He's like really weird. He's like an alien. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, very depressing. I have a hard time watching that movie. Looks like you're worried. It's because I have wrinkles on my forehead. And I've like most of my life, I'm like sitting there thinking. What do you mean all-star cast and no one's heard of it? Everybody knows Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Like that's like everybody's favorite movie. It's like the original Manic Pixie Dream Girl movie. Like everybody knows that movie. Oh, I still haven't seen Requiem for a Dream. I've been trying to hype myself up to watch that movie for like several years. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. I still haven't brought myself to do it. That reminds me. Oh God, what's that movie where the guy has a million people in his head? There's like the woman with the pet chimpanzee that she takes to therapy. What's that movie called? Being John Malkovich. Oh my God, that's one of my favorite movies. I did not get that movie. The first time I saw it, I was like 21. And then I watched it again like a couple years ago, and I was like, oh my God, I understand now. That movie, oh my God. The second time I watched it, it was like watching a whole new movie because it's like, I can't believe, like, I feel like I didn't see the deeper meaning when I was 21, and then I saw it again, and like, it was like a gut punch. As good as it gets. Oh, I like As Good as It Gets. Good Times Noodle Salad. That's the only line I remember from that movie. Alright. What time is it? Oh, it's like 9 o'clock. It's still pretty early. Oh my God. I guess I can hang out. It's not really my bedtime yet. Hocus Pocus used to be an obsession when I was a kid. It was very silly. Oh man. How's the dog doing? He's chilling with me. He's very well-behaved dog. Okay, I'll be right back. Give me like 1 minute. I can do dog cam maybe. Let's see. I'm chilling. I don't know if I can get it angled just right. Let me see. Are you gonna leave? He says don't look at me. Okay. He doesn't want to be bothered. I'm gonna take a minute. Wyatt. Okay, so Wyatt took my spot. So I'm gonna come over here. He's chill though. Anyway. Yeah, so I never remember any movie lines because I feel like the way you remember movie lines is you like watch movies with other people. And like I spend a lot of time like just playing guitar by myself and like I don't know. Like there's just not people around to joke with about movies. And like I don't know, a lot of them just like don't like the same movies I do or whatever. I don't know. I'm like an island of a human like that nobody ever sails to or something. This is your sailboat to my island. So like you do a line and then I'll joke with you about it. I don't even understand. Like, I don't understand. Someone says I'm the bread queen, but I don't understand how I'm the bread queen because most of the time I don't even eat bread. Like, it's very bloating and I don't like that. Like, it's very hard to like, it's very hard to create definition around any of your muscles if you eat bread, or me at least. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm just a distributor of bread for other people to eat bread. What are we doing, bud? Well, I gotta make room for a dog to go down the stairs. Movies have changed too and are pretty lame now, so it's kind of a lost hobby. Yeah, like it's true. It is kind of a lost hobby. Like they're kind of too expensive. Like I haven't seen a movie in a theater since Dune 2. And like honestly, that was because someone else paid for it. Because I can't afford to go see movies on my own. Or like I used to go see movies when I could get free tickets, like when it was when it's like you go so you can write a review or like critique the movie. So I used to go do that. Um Before I saw the Dune movies in theaters, I saw Black Panther. Like that's how many years between there was. So like, yeah, I don't know. Sally says when I'm with my family, that's when the movie quotes spew out. That sounds funny. I don't know. I don't There's not a lot of movie quotes that spew out around people I'm around. I don't know. I don't remember the last time I watched a movie. I guess it might have been something I watched. I don't know. I watch stand-up comedy more than I watch movies. I often don't have the patience to sit through movies. Um, do you ever feel just like restless? Like my mom was like this my whole life too. Like she just couldn't sit still and she was off in the other room doing something. Yeah. Like I often feel like I can't even sit through a movie unless it's like some kind of like visually stunning or critically acclaimed movie. I'm kind of a brat. Uh, Lasisa says your husband will beat you about this. This is why I'm not married. I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with the annoyance of having to watch movies with anybody. Um, yeah. I don't know. I don't feel stressed and tired. Like I love um I love like taking walks and getting out in the world and like dancing and okay, I love stand-up comedy. Like I think Chris Fleming is like the funniest person in the entire world because he's like really verbose but also really good at physical comedy and he references like so much stuff. Like there's that. I don't know. I don't know. Like what's the last movie you saw that you enjoyed? Like, I remember when I went to see a movie in theaters, I saw a bunch of previews and I remember seeing I can't believe that made it to be a movie. Like I can't believe that is selling tickets. And like maybe I'm like overly critical, but it seems like the plot can be really thin and non-existent and it's still a movie. And I don't understand how that happens. I'm just very like not into it. Oh, I did want to see Oppenheimer. I wanted to see Oppenheimer and Barbie. That did sound good. You saw Trap. What was that about? I mean, it's an M. Night Shyamalan movie, so I'm sure it's like just like every M. Night Shyamalan movie. Theater was in Mordecai and the one was about a hotel. Um, I wanted to see Oppenheimer and Barbie, but was too nervous to go by myself. You should just go. Honestly, I haven't seen the movies because I don't know, I had to prioritize other things. Grand Budapest Hotel was okay. Um, yeah, I haven't enjoyed movies in a long time. Yeah. What's the appeal? Like, okay, I'm an alien, so like, what's the appeal of movies to you? What is the appeal? Because, like, to me, it's like you're sitting down, you're forced to sit down for 2 hours, and like, you're often forced to watch a story that you can usually predict, or like, you're forced to deal with characters that don't act like real people, or are too predictable, or like, I don't know, like, yeah, you say a good story, but I often don't feel like it's a good story when I watch a movie. Like often I have to go into a movie, like I often am not gonna enjoy a movie unless I go into the movie telling myself like you just have to accept that you're gonna hate this next 2 hours. And then sometimes it's like, okay, I guess that wasn't that bad. I was very depressed by A Beautiful Mind. Like it's kind of like everything that's wrong with mental health care and still is a problem to this day, except like we handle it slightly less unethically. I don't know. I was a kid when I saw A Beautiful Mind, and I remember being like, "Whoa, this is so sad." Like, have you ever seen the movie Shine? That was also really sad. It was like this kid that's incredibly good at piano and just gets abused to hell because everybody around them is trying to abuse them into greatness. Anyway, I don't know. I'm letting my elitism like come out, but like I just can't. Like, yeah, so I'm very picky though. There's a couple films that I love. One of my favorite films of all time is Survive Style 5 Plus. And you can watch it for free on YouTube, but it is a really visually stunning film, so it's better if you can watch it like you could buy a copy on Amazon, but it's like it's expensive to get a copy of the DVD, but like you can watch it for free on Amazon. It's called Survive Style 5 Plus and they have it, but it's better to watch if you can watch it in like the best definition possible because the sets are so incredibly beautiful. Um, but um, but you can watch it for free if you can't afford to pay for it. Um, Sally says, "What about Interstellar?" It's not my favorite. Like, I really didn't like the ending to Interstellar. Um, it just didn't resonate with me very well. I remember being really disappointed at the end, like, oh, what a cop out. But like, I really liked Gravity though. I feel like Gravity had the journey of like a good emotional story that was very relatable. I feel like Gravity did it way better than Interstellar because I feel like Interstellar was a roundabout way that kind of avoided the introspection, and I feel like Gravity like explored the introspection of the mother-daughter relationship visually and like communicated it very well. And that's just my stupid opinion. Yeah, I feel like Gravity was so emotionally compelling. I felt that like okay, so my opinion is Gravity was emotionally realistic. Like I feel like Interstellar tried to be scientifically realistic, but emotionally was not as compelling as I would have preferred. But Gravity was emotionally gripping, like about the mother-daughter relationship. And that's what I think really did it for me. Um, what else? Another movie that I love is oh yeah, so like I try not to talk about Disney movies anymore because for some reason everybody thinks that all I like is Disney movies and that couldn't be further from the truth. But Maleficent is like one of my favorite movies because that's also like an incredible mother-daughter story. Like the scene where the kid is about to like fall off the cliff and then Maleficent saves her begrudgingly and then like the child like climbs up on her and is all happy and she's just like disgusted by the kid is like the best scene ever. I just love it so much. It's so real. Like before I got good at dealing with kids, like I really used to be like a little bit like put off by kids and so it was like so realistic. I was like she's gonna save this kid she hates because it's the right thing to do and also she's like grossed out by this kid that loves her now. It's like one of my favorite scenes of all movie history. Um And also just like how like she got her wings cut off by this stupid guy is like it's so good. It's such a good movie. And just like also just like being able to look at Angelina Jolie's cheekbones the whole time is like top notch. It's like my favorite. Um like makes the whole movie worth watching. But also visual. Okay, the other thing about Maleficent is they do a bunch of flying scenes and just there's something very primal about a flying scene that just makes my body tingle. Like it's just very physical. So I like that's why I hate Disney because like they know the formula to make you feel good and they will exploit it for your money and it sucks, but whatever. It was a good movie. It was visually stunning. It was emotionally gripping. It was a good movie. It was very real. What else? Neverending Story. It's been years since I thought about that movie. Yeah, I mean, I haven't thought about Neverending Story since I was like 3 or 4, so it's really hard to remember. But I remember it being one of those like, God, this is creepy and also amazing. But it's been a long time since I've thought about it. Dan says just walked in. What are we doing here? I finished reading Shadow Out of Innsmouth and now we're talking about movies. Um, we're talking about our favorite movies, so if you have one, yeah. Just remember the dumbass wishes the kid was doing on the second film of NES. What does that mean? I'm not sure. Uh, okay, guys. I think I'm getting tired. Oh yeah, Donnie Darko. I don't remember very much about Donnie Darko. I only saw it once. Like the amount that you would have to watch a movie to remember like specific lines from it is like so time consuming. I am getting sleepy. It's like I wish I could just leave the live stream open so the chat can continue to talk about movies and like I'll go do something else. Shows? I don't watch TV. I don't have a TV. Um I could only make it through a few episodes of Sopranos before I like started reading books and like doing other stuff. Like I'm just an alien. I don't watch TV. Never have been able to. Like it's at around age 12 or 13 I stopped and I never was able to pick it up again. Um but I know that the human beings enjoy television and so there's kind of always like a gap, I guess, in trying to relate to human beings. Like every time someone tries to show me a show, like I'm the most insufferable human being. I'm just like picking it apart and like I hate this. Why are you making me do this? I can't stand this. And like I just can't change. Like why do you watch TV? Like I feel like people don't act like real people. Your uncle's in Sopranos, that's cool. Who did he play? Read the Club Dumas is about books and looking for a book written by Lucifer. I feel like the Bible was written by Lucifer. Super thrilling, right? Oh yeah, Twin Peaks is one of the few shows I can tolerate. I love Twin Peaks. I started watching season 3 but couldn't make it through the end of season 3. But like that's one of the shows I can tolerate. But like season 2 is rough. It was like really hard to get through season 2 of Twin Peaks because it gets so like soap opera-y. I was like so disappointed. But like it is what it is. Like the end of season 2 is really cool, but like oh my God. I guess it just comes with the territory. Yeah, I do like the pie and coffee. I like the weirdo characters in Twin Peaks. It's like everybody's a caricature of themselves, and I enjoy that a lot. Yeah, Beth Rosen, I've heard it before. It's like I know that's what people do. They tell you they like a show because they feel like it helps you understand them, but that's like a huge amount. Like I don't even understand myself. Like I'm gonna watch 30 hours of a TV show to understand someone else. Like I just have never been able to do it. Like maybe that makes me a shithead, but like there's just other stuff that I want to do in my day besides watch TV, and I haven't been able to watch TV in like it's like 24 years now that I haven't been able to commit to watching TV, and I don't think I'm gonna change for another person. Like I would like to understand myself first, and I don't even do that very well, you know? And like lots of people have told me that, but just like I don't know, I just can't. Like I don't have the money to buy a TV and like oh, the point of movies is to lose your thoughts for a while. I do that by dancing. Like I find that really effective and like really fun and way cheaper than TV. I'd way rather spend 2 hours dancing than watching TV. TV never makes me feel euphoria, but dancing always makes me feel euphoria. So like if you talk about priorities, like I don't know, that's just how I feel. Like, have you ever felt euphoria from a TV? I know I'm being an asshole right now, but this is how I feel. Video games give you euphoria? I have never gotten euphoria from video games. That's crazy. I don't understand. This is why I'm not a normal human. I don't know. I more so like feel annoyed whenever I watch TV or play video games, but that's just me. Like I'm just an asshole or whatever. I don't know. Okay, guys, I'm really tired. Um, your uncle is a film and TV editor. One of my earliest memories is walking through his editing studio when I was 5, and I've been obsessed with film since. That's cool. Do you make film yourself, see? Like, that's cool. If your uncle's in film, you should totally do film. Yeah, I never feel euphoria from movies or TV. It's more like, oh, that's a nice. Once in a while, it's like the thought or concept of, oh, that's a nice ending. Like, it doesn't, like, it doesn't, like, I don't know. It pales in comparison to interacting with real humans, I guess. And, like, I don't know. Like, don't you ever watch a movie or TV and be like, oh, that was nice, but I'd way rather have experienced some of those things with people I care about. That's usually how I leave a TV or a movie feeling, is I way rather wish I had experienced running through a field like they did, or like skydiving like those characters did, or it's like why they make me feel like why am I not living my life? Like why am I not doing stuff instead of like watching it happen to other people? So like, I don't know. I know it's an art form just like music, but I'm just telling you how I feel about that particular art form. Like certain people like don't connect with certain art forms, I guess, you know? Like I'm not gonna try to explain to you why you should care about like cubism or something. Like or like um or like I'm not going to try to explain to other people why they should care about knitting, you know? Like maybe you just don't. And like you shouldn't have to. Arrest says you will like TV, damn it. I wish I could. Like I would probably relate to people a lot better if I did, but it's just not something that I'm good at doing, unfortunately. I know. I know you're kidding. Okay. I'm tired and I'm gonna go because like my eyeballs are getting really dry. But like this has been an interesting conversation and I appreciate you guys. But I I feel like a crappy human who's crappy at relating to other people, so I'm gonna go and I'm gonna, I don't know, read or do something else. But have fun, you guys. I feel like you guys should create a Discord server where you guys go talk because like you guys are fun. You guys have a good night. I love you. Bye bye.